during class. Let's start with our song. This is the last time this class meets. Did y'all know that? And I told you last week that I wanted to get to Christ and church culture, and we might get there today. I wasn't finished with politics. But let's sing our song. You are a chosen generation, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, God's own treasured possession, called out of darkness to marvelous light. You were not a kindred people, now you are a family. You had not received God's mercy, now His grace has set you free. You are a chosen generation, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, God's own treasured possession, called out of darkness to marvelous light. Now I want to make sure you remember who wrote the lyrics. Apostle Peter, right? Lyrics by Peter from the Holy Spirit. Okay, salt and light. Do y'all remember a time when in a sermon where Jesus talked about you being salt and light? This is a sermon that has a name.
Sermon on the Mount.
Thank you. Sermon on the Mount. Exactly. Thank you, Mark. You are the salt of the earth. But if salt loses its flavor, this is Matthew 5, 13 through 16, if you want to look at it, follow me along. If you want to follow along. But if salt loses its flavor, how can it be made salty again? It is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled on by people. You are the light of the world. A city located on a hill cannot be hidden. Do you remember a political figure in your lifetime who talked about this country being a city on a hill? Pretty famous political figure.
Was it Ronald Reagan?
The first Bush talked about the points of light.
1,000 points, yeah. But city on a hill? See, the reason I asked is because I can't remember, and I think you might be right. I think it might be Ronald Reagan. George Bush talked about 1,000 points of light. And what are they doing? What are these politicians doing? Are they equating America with the church? Do you think? You think Lincoln, did he quote the Bible? A house divided against itself cannot stand. Who's he quoting? Jesus. Yeah. And I don't think it's wrong for politicians necessarily to quote the Bible. I think maybe if they did it more often, it might be good. People do not light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on a lampstand, and it gives light to all in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before people. Are we supposed to be coming together and hiding from the world? So that they can see your good deeds and give honor to your Father in heaven. So why does Jesus say we need to let our light shine? What's the purpose? So, I heard lots of right answers. So God will get the glory. So people will learn the gospel. Those are reasons. And I don't know about y'all, but in my mind growing up, I thought you did really good things for people so they would like you. And I cannot say at 70 years old that I've outgrown that. I wish, but I think it's still a part of my thought process. Why am I nice to you? I want you to like me. Here's what Peter thought. This is 1 Peter 2, verse 17, about politics, people in political power. Honor all men, love the brotherhood, fear God, honor the king. Now, Do you think that just means when you have a king, or does that mean any political leaders? How would you apply that in your thinking? I think it means, nobody wants to say anything, I think it means you honor those in positions of political power. Not just the king, but the mayor. And I've seen members of churches in this community get on Facebook and hammer the mayor. I know the mayor. I wouldn't say he's a good buddy of mine or anything, but and I don't really know what goes on in town all the time, so I don't know what they're fussing about. But I think you honor the person in that position, the governor. I have been pretty good friends with one of our governors in the past, but that doesn't mean I don't honor all of them. President, if you're getting on Facebook and saying nasty things about this president or the one before, you're not honoring the president, your senator, your representatives. And I was thinking about this because I told y'all that when I was growing up, I just thought politics was awesome. I loved politics. And so when I was reading this verse, preparing for this class, I was thinking, am I supposed to honor even the ones who sound like absolute ignoramuses and fools? Are there some? Are you hearing people who are in our Congress who are speaking in public, speaking in public, and I think, man, God, that's hard to honor those people. Paul, what?
You don't necessarily have to honor them, but you don't have to be putting them down.
Okay. Wendell's making a distinction between honoring them and just not putting them down.
We were taught always respect the position. We elected them to that position, respect the position. Some people abuse the position, some don't.
That's a very good point. And I've heard it, position or office, respect the office. And part of the ones that I think sound like morons are the ones who are so disrespectful of the office. And from either, I'm not talking about one particular side, okay? Although I have to tell you, in my mind, one side sounds a lot dumber than the other one sometimes. But we're not going to get into that. So what does Paul say about this? And this is from 2 Corinthians 10. It's about to be up there. Tracy. There it is. For though we live in the world, we do not wage war as the world does. To me, that's real important. This is a fight, but what weapons are we supposed to use? The weapons we fight with are not the weapons of the world. On the contrary, they have divine power to demolish strongholds. I feel pretty strongly about this. I think political activism might interfere with our mission on earth. We're called to reach the world with the good news of salvation, right? In the Messiah, Jesus. We haven't been called to moralize our society. And I think that for us can become a distraction and take away our focus. Messiah, Jesus. The fact that the Bible, and I want you to hear this, the Bible never encourages us to attempt to use political means to bring governmental change to our communities. And that might lead us to conclude that political activism must not be very important to God. And I'm going to ask you some questions a little down the road here, because I think you can have different opinions about this and we can still be united in our purpose here and in our beliefs. One of the things he mentions in this is weapons not of this world. And I wanted to ask you if any of you have read either of these books that are about to come up. Anybody read either, one, both? Really? No? Okay. Well, I would highly recommend the first one. The second one, only read that if you got time to waste. But I would say that both of them heighten your awareness of the world around you that you can't detect with your senses. Now, I think Joe Beam, I met him a long time ago, like when I was a teenager. His perspective is very biblical. Frank Peretti, his perspective is very 19th century Great Awakening perspective. And I think it's pretty wild and has lots of misconceptions, but it does. Do you ever wonder what's happening in the world around us that we can't see, that we're not aware of? I don't think we should obsess over this. I want to make sure that you understand this is one slide and we're moving on. I think if we obsessed over what's happening in the spiritual warfare around us that nobody detects, I think obsessing over that would be unbiblical and unhealthy. But I've wondered, what would I perceive if I could force myself to focus maybe a little bit less on this material world? And I think most of us would almost immediately, without even thinking about it, reflexively say, well, this is reality. This is our reality. What we can see, touch, taste, and hear is our reality. As believers, though, don't we have to admit there are forces around us beyond our perceptions? Don't we think that's happening? Like I said, I don't want to spend a lot of time on that. Don't want to emphasize that. Okay, I have a quote from a professor of theology at Duke University. And I wouldn't read this quote to you other than to say, he says something that I think that I needed to think about. And maybe you need to too. He says, you can either be a responsible participant in modern democracy, doing your bit to make this world a better place, or you can be an irresponsible sectarian nothing who fearfully withdraws from the world. Are those our only choices? Participate in democracy, do your bit, or be an irresponsible sectarian and withdraw? Are those the only choices that you see? Are they biblical choices? Let me ask, is voting a Christian duty? Don't raise your hand. But think about, is voting, some of you will think yes, and some of you will think no. Should we abstain? Maybe we shouldn't even think about it. Notice that I'm not promoting either one because I'm still thinking about it. What about political involvement beyond just voting? Should we campaign for candidates publicly or campaign for issues publicly? What about just quietly sharing information about a candidate we actually know? And I've had people in church say, this judge is I know this lady, she's a good person. You need to vote for her for the Arkansas Supreme Court. What happens to your influence if you do that and the candidate turns out to be just a bummer, just terrible? When they get elected, you just go, oh my goodness. What happens to that person's influence on what you think from then on, even about godly Christian things? That concerns me.
People are watching us. You know, if we claim to be Christians, you may have more influence than you think you have.
Mm-hmm.
And both ways.
Right.
And they watch you, and good or bad.
Yeah, yeah. Now, I want you to think about, in your head, think about what you know about Jesus. Do you think he would have engaged in politics if he'd lived in a democracy? Because you don't see it. You don't see him involved in politics in the New Testament. But if he'd lived in a democracy, do you think he would have gone to vote? Let's see, Tiberius or Caligula, Herod or Antipas. Who do I vote for? Anyway, going on from that. Do y'all know the name David Lipscomb? Is that familiar to you? Why do you know the name? There's a university in Nashville, Tennessee, called David Lipscomb University. It started as a Bible college. It was co-founded by him and a guy named, is it James Harding? Does that name sound familiar, Harding? He founded a Bible college in Morrilton. And where is it now? Oh, good. Y'all do know what's going on. Good. It's in Searcy. It was originally established as a preacher training school. Some of you may remember the name of the church on this marquee. Anybody know what the connection is? When I was a teenager, I was a member of the Noonan Church of Christ in Noonan, Georgia. Now, I don't know the timeline or anything, but I know that my family were members there for 20-something years. My dad was an elder. And I also know that it folded up. And I don't know if it was decades ago. I don't know if it was 10 years. I don't know when. But I've mentioned this place a couple of times. I was a member in the 70s. And then it didn't just fold, it merged with churches of Christ in small towns around it. But this is a newer church. This one can't have been there actually, because I ran across this sign in my preparations, I looked up their website and stuff, and it looks like a pretty new building. It's not anywhere close to the old one. But I was quite surprised to find it online a couple of weeks ago. The sign was interesting, though. It's the reason we're looking at this sign. That's a whole lot of extra history that's not particularly interesting to anybody, maybe, but me. But it's very important for us to understand and absorb in our hearts that no politician can save us. Only the true Messiah, not the elephant nor the donkey, but the Lamb who is a lion shall be our Savior. I loved that sign. Did you know that in 1954, and I'm pleased to say that was before I was born, Congress approved an amendment by Senator Lyndon Johnson. Some of you will remember that name. And it prohibited 501c3 organizations, which includes charities and churches, from engaging in any political campaign activity. Did you know that? Now, that doesn't mean that if our church takes a political stand, we'll all be arrested. It means that we'll now have to pay taxes. Our church will have to pay taxes on income, including, I don't know if you know, but when we pay our ministers, there's different kinds of tax laws for them than there are for the rest of us. Were y'all aware of that? Because of that status. It was part of that idea of separation of church and state. And I see people fighting about this all the time online, that we're taking God out of the world and stuff. But separation of church and state probably protects people like us more than it inhibits anything. Not for us to be entangled with government. Faith-based ministries, though, for the last couple of decades have started receiving federal grants. This kind of stuff has a history. How long have we had a church? How long has there been a church? A couple of thousand years, yeah, exactly. A couple of thousand years. And you can look back through the history of the church and see where the church got involved in the government just a little bit, then a little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more, then becomes part of the government. And it's always turns out terribly. It's always disastrous for the reputation of the church, for the mission of the church. It's a mess. I've never heard of a single time when it didn't somehow, some way, eventually corrupt the church. There's that pursuit of power, and the church becomes financially dependent on the government. And it's yes, exactly. It becomes an agency of the government, and it seems like churches don't learn from that. Well, you can look out in the political landscape and see that we just don't learn from history, right? The way the people we elect, the ideologies that we support, we're not learning from history. One of the examples that's maybe more recent that most people are aware of was in Germany in the 1930s and 40s. Do you know that the German churches allied with the National Socialist Party in Germany? Who did they elect? Adolf Hitler. Those churches, 80, 90 years later, have never recovered. As you can imagine, if you were a German citizen, would you support a church that had been allied with Adolf Hitler? Okay, Romans 13. Tracy, we're on slide 12. There we go. Romans 13:1. As you meditate on the meaning of this for us, I hope you're reading it. As you think about that, consider what the original readers' lives were like in that city. People who lived in Rome. The authorities and the wealthy supported activities at something called the Colosseum. And in the Roman world, there were things like the Colosseum in every major city. Part of the sport to which your neighbors bought tickets, your friends, and maybe your family, bought tickets to go into that building to watch you be torn apart by lions. And that was, that's the one they like to put in the movies. There are all kinds of ways that you tortured people to death for sport. And this is what Paul writes to them about being subject to those authorities. What benefits were the Christians getting from the authorities in their city? Okay, Paul writes to Timothy in 1 Timothy 2:1 and 2. I want you to pray for all people. Ask God to help and bless them. Give thanks for them. Pray for kings. Pray for everyone who is in authority. So if we had any doubt before about whether or not kings, we should also pray for presidents and mayors and governors. Well, there it is. Everyone who is in authority. Pray that we can live peaceful and quiet lives. And pray that we will be godly and holy. That sounds very similar to me to the letter that Jeremiah wrote to the exiled Jews in Babylon. He also told them, go ahead and have children. There are people in our tribe these days who are saying, oh, it's a horrible world to bring children into. Well, you think Babylon was a great place for Jewish kids? We just can't imagine how bad that was, because we've never experienced anything like that. But he said to grow your tribe. It's like that. contribute to your community's prosperity, help it thrive. And then live peaceful and quiet lives. Let me ask you this, and I know you're going to be thinking of specific ideologies, and I can't help that, but how do you feel about that burn it all down mentality? And you know, there are people representing churches who are part of that. Believe that if we don't burn all this down, then we're not good Christians. And I think maybe the most important thing, at least for me, is to pray for my own godliness and holiness. I need to pray for that. I hope you include that in your personal prayers. So, what is visible to the outside world about our Christianity? Here's another quote from that Duke theology professor that I agreed with when I thought about it. I hadn't thought about it until I read it. Most Americans assume that we live in a society that is at least vestigially Christian. And that's a big word that I may not pronounce very well, and it would be better if you could see it, because then I know you'd know what it means. But, you know, I don't know. Evolutionists talk about vestigial parts in our bodies, you know, things that don't function in our bodies anymore because of evolution. We don't need it like the, what's that organ everybody gets removed? Appendix, yeah. And people talk about the structure in the back that for the vestigial tail that we lost when we climbed out of trees. You know, that's what evolutionists talk about. But he says vestigially Christian. We think that at least the vestiges of Christianity are still part of our culture. And he says, North America is a place where people have absorbed just enough Christianity to inoculate them against the contagion by the real thing. And I laughed out loud when I read that. I thought, yeah, that he's talking about me. And then I thought, what is my Christian duty? Do I abstain? Do I campaign? Most of my life, I was very naive about government, about schools, about any kind of organization. I believed that the United States, my state, wherever I lived at the time, local governments, they were at least benign. They weren't out to get me. And possibly even promoted and supported the values that I thought were most important. I'm not sure exactly what sequence of events over time unveiled my eyes. You probably can think of things. I don't know if you grew up that way. Maybe you've always known. You've always looked at the government and said, I don't trust you at all. But I was raised in schools that were pretty patriotic. And, you know, America is the greatest place that's ever been. And they're always doing good. Everything they do is good. Now, over the last couple of decades, starting to see open hostility toward Christianity. Are you? And it's not just one political party. All right. This next one you're going to find interesting, I think. In Arkansas, we have what we call the AAA. And most of you may not be familiar with this. It's called the Arkansas Activities Association. And they regulate, it's a bunch, usually it's former principals, former coaches, and they regulate interscholastic sports, you know, sports between schools. They're also in charge of Arkansas School Band and Orchestra Association, and which I was a part of for 36 years. And I can tell you that a whole lot of what we did in our organization was to make sure we didn't do anything to tick off the AAA. That was our objective, so that they wouldn't meddle. They let us do our own thing unless we did something that they thought was wrong. Because they didn't know. They didn't have any band people in the AAA, and they didn't know exactly what we did. But in Vermont, this school is in Vermont, it's called the Vermont Principals Association that regulates all of these things, and the VPA kicked this school out because they would not play a team with a transgender player in the state playoffs. Not only did they kick this team out of the state playoffs, they banned every sport from this school from playing other schools in Vermont. And because of that one game that they forfeited, they would not play the other school. And for the last 2 years, they couldn't play any Vermont schools. Not only that, but just like in Arkansas, the VPA regulates things like debate and science fairs. Their kids can't participate. Now, I'm not interested at all in a debate about public school versus private school versus homeschool, because I've known people who grew up in all of those and have done extremely well. And I see that there are benefits for kids in each system. I see positives in all three, and I don't think anybody knows your children like you do. Okay? So, there was a time I felt more strongly about public schools than I do now because I worked in them for 36 years. I worked in a private school for 3 years. And I saw good things in both of them. Now, the U.S. Court of Appeals last September granted a temporary injunction against the Vermont Principals Association until the U.S. Supreme Court hears the case. Okay, so they have sued their government. One of the things I thought about when you hear so many things, you see so many arguments in this case about what the founding fathers thought about public education. You know, the ones who wrote the Constitution, the ones who formed the first government and set it up. And the thing that's really funny about that to me is all these people writing don't know anything about history. In the 1770s and the 1780s, none of those guys thought about public education. It didn't exist. There was no such thing. All of them will say, what will keep this democracy thriving is an educated population. But it never entered their minds that that should be taxpayer supported and organized by the government. That was not a thing. 1839, the first school district in America was established. 50 years later, okay? Those guys, every one of them was dead before this happened. And do you know when it became a universal thing in the United States for kids to at least have to go to elementary school and for them to have public schools established for that? It was 80 years later, 1918, finally the last state kind of buckled and said, okay, we'll offer elementary schools to all of our children. But it didn't catch on quickly, the idea. And I just wanted to point out that the argument people are making is ridiculous, because the people who said all those things were not thinking public schools. If we're logical people, inconsistencies in our culture are going to drive us crazy, but we should expect them. Tracy, we can go to 16. I think it's 16. Yeah. Intolerance will not be tolerated. I think that's hilarious. Should we tolerate all claims? The tolerance of all behaviors and claims, even right now, is leading to the normalization in some circles of things like pedophilia. Well, you can't say anything about these people. This is just the way they were made. Or if I identify as a cat, you have to provide kitty litter in the bathrooms. And it's clear insanity. I see a lot of nodding heads. You've heard about this stuff. If I assert the truth, pedophilia is sinful, it's wrong, you are not a cat. I might not should repeat this joke. Robin hates it, so I won't. Ask me later. I'll be glad to tell you. I think it's hilarious. She thinks it's mean. But if I assert the truth, I'm intolerant, right? But you should tolerate my intolerance, right? Shouldn't they? I mean, if they tolerate everything. Friedrich Nietzsche, I know you've heard that name. He's a 19th century German philosopher. He's the one that said, and you'll recognize this saying, what did he say famously? God is dead, exactly. God is dead. But this is a quote. The quote on the right states that there are no absolute truths. Is he stating an absolute truth? Yeah. It's kind of like like an oxymoron. He states there are no absolute truths as an absolute truth. Now, I'm about to run out of time, so we're going to skip ahead because I wanted to get to the end. I want to let Jesus have the final word. Tracy, I don't know what the slide number is, but it's probably 30. Anyway, this is a picture, not there. It's a picture of a lake. I want to let Jesus have the final word here. This is from the Sermon on the Mount. I got to sit on this hillside about 8 years ago with about 50 other believers. And Ben and Belinda, by the way, were a part of that group. And I got to listen to my brother Monty recite the entire Sermon on the Mount. He didn't read it. He memorized it. It's all 3 chapters from Matthew 5, 6, and 7. And it sounds a little different in a setting like this. It is just as, that's the Sea of Galilee. This might be the very mount. All of these are really hills. Everything in Israel that they call a mount is really a hill by our definition, except for Mount Hermon, which we can talk about some other time. But all the words sound different in this setting. And I want to finish with these. Blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness. Not for our self-righteousness, but because we do behave righteously. For theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when people insult you, persecute you, and falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me. Rejoice and be glad, because great is your reward in heaven. For in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you. Jesus never encourages us to be the heroic individual going after public feats of demolishing the enemy, but he urges us to deal with others as God has dealt with us. Thank you for being here and for your participation.
Well done. Appreciate that.
Thank you.